Hello and welcome to the Harrogate podcast with me, Andrew Gray. As regular listeners will know, my job is to interview and to deconstruct the movers and shakers in Harrogate. Today I'm delighted to have with me two people. First I have Jemima Parker, who is the chair of Zero Carbon Harrogate. I also have with me Ian Fraser, who leads the carbon capture working group at Zero Carbon Harrogate. Today we're going to talk about the origins of Zero Carbon Harrogate and what the people here in Harrogate can do and should do. Jemima, let me start by asking you the same question that I asked of Professor Andy Goulson. And it's a slightly tongue-in-cheek question, but I do think it's a right place to start. Around 10,000 years ago or so, Harrogate was frozen. We were experiencing an ice age here. The temperature goes up and the temperature goes down naturally. Volcanoes will chuck out carbon into the atmosphere, as will animals. It's a natural thing that the Earth's orbit changes and therefore the climate changes with it. Can you convince people that climate change is a real thing? And maybe give us something positive that we could do about it early on in this podcast.
Hi Andrew, nice to be with you. Certainly, of course the climate has always been changing. What we're experiencing now is an unprecedented speed of change. So we've seen 1 degree of global warming, average global warming, in just 150 years.
Goodness.
And that's accelerating year on year. And it's that really, really rapid change that is requiring some urgent action because of our human behaviour. And on the ground, we see that in the Harrogate district with more extremes of weather. So our rainfall is becoming more intense, coming in more intense bursts, which affects our local farmers because they're getting flooding and crop damage. And we're seeing it in terms of heat waves. We're seeing it in terms of our seasons going haywire. We had a really hot period in February, if you remember. We're getting, broadly speaking, milder winters, but sometimes we still get cold winters. It's weather, it fluctuates, but overall our climate is getting warmer. And we can take action to reduce the carbon emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere and to prevent that rapid rise in global temperatures.
Jemima, so you didn't really need to convince me, but some listeners may need convincing about climate change being a real thing. But it seems so impossible for humans to collaborate internationally, because it's an international problem, it's not a Harrogate problem, to do anything about it. Surely it's game, set and match for humanity. We might as well drive our 5-litre cars, have the heating on in summer, take planes round the world, have as many holidays as we like, and trash our planet because it's too impossible to do anything about it, or not.
Certainly not, Andy. The IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 1.5 degree report that came out last year, showed the pathway that we need to take in order to get to net zero carbon emissions, and showed clearly that it is possible for us as humanity to avert dangerous climate change. And that means that every community across the globe needs to play its part. The government figures show that each of us in Harrogate on average is responsible for 7.1 tonnes of carbon emissions a year each.
Goodness.
So we need to take some responsibility for that and start to work out how individually and as businesses we can reduce our carbon emissions. Globally, we have 420 billion tonnes left in our global budget of carbon emissions that we can burn through before we go push our climate over 1.5 degrees of warming. And that's a challenge for us not to go over budget. We tend to be really good at thinking about our financial budgets and we make sure we don't go over those. It's just a question of applying those skills to a different sort of budget, a carbon budget.
Thank you. So did you say 7.6 tonnes each English or British person pumps out into the climate or into the environment each year? Was that the number?
7.1 for an average Harrogate resident.
Okay, thank
you. And UK average is 5.5. So Harrogate residents have a higher than average, and of course it's an average. We're all slightly different in the amount of carbon emissions that we produce.
That is absolutely fascinating and scandalous. Now, do you know why it is that people of Harrogate pump out more carbon than the average British person? Any thoughts?
Well, essentially, every pound we spend has a carbon footprint, because if you're buying something, whatever the product is, has been manufactured, and that uses energy, and that energy will have created carbon emissions in its manufacture. If you're using services, people providing those services have buildings that they have to maintain and so forth. So pretty much everything, all our activities have a carbon cost. And so in Harrogate, I think it's fair to say that there's a very high standard of living for most people, and therefore we have a high carbon footprint in this area.
Jemima, thank you for explaining that point so coherently and cogently. Do you think that's a message that the people in Harrogate broadly know, that by being middle class, more or less, by being wealthy, that their carbon footprint is greater than other parts of the UK, which is perhaps more, I don't like the term, but I'll run with it, more working class, perhaps a little poorer than in Harrogate? Do you think people in Harrogate know that, and should we feel more guilty about it as well?
I think probably most people aren't aware, because most of us aren't what I would call carbon literate. We're not used to thinking about our actions in terms of the carbon cost. We're really good at thinking about them in terms of the financial cost. And one of the things that with Zero Carbon Harrogate we're trying to encourage is for people to become more carbon literate, so that they know the difference between the cost of different things in terms of carbon. So, for example, I don't need to consult the rest of my family about the cost of my tea bags, but I might want to talk about the cost of booking a holiday. And so we need to kind of begin to understand the different costs, carbon costs of our different activities. And so, yeah, that's an important thing for us each going forward.
Thank you. An anecdote I heard, I think this comes from Betty's or Taylor's, was that if you looked at the carbon footprint of a cup of tea, you have the tea which is picked probably in India and sorted there, sifted and sent back to England, Yorkshire, to be processed. It's processed here in a factory using lots of electricity, and then it's taken to a shop, and then you collect it from the shop, and then eventually you have the cup of tea. You boil your water with all that intensity of electricity to boil the kettle. You make your cup of tea, you take your tea bag out, and then as soon as you put a splash of milk in, the carbon footprint of your cup of tea doubles. And that blew my mind as a concept. And I didn't know that the cows, the milk was so horrendous. I knew there was a problem with cows and so on, but I didn't realise it was to that level of extremes. When you talk about people in Harrogate becoming more carbon literate, how do we do that when it comes to products, the tea, the milk, where we ate at lunch today? Do you have any ideas personally, not just Zero Carbon Harrogate? I mean, what can people do to really understand each thing that they buy, that how the impact it has on the planet?
Andy, I'm really pleased you mentioned Taylor's and Betty's, because they've worked really hard to make their supply chain carbon neutral. 45% on average of the emissions from our food come from the manufacture on the farm, and so it's really important that we think about how our food is grown, and then it's in a way less significant thinking about how it is packaged and how it's transported. Quite often we get hung up on where foods come from. Clearly buying local is good, but actually how it's produced on the farm is the most significant part of its carbon emissions.
Great answer. I agree with you. Betty's deserve all the credit that they can get and should get for their work on decarbonising. They also plant, I think, a lot of trees, I seem to think.
They do.
Good for them. Yorkshire, in a way, leading the way. So you have given us something positive to be proud about and to sort of wave the Harrogate and Yorkshire flag. Thank you for that. I've started off with some tough questions for you there, Jemima, but I should really have started maybe more easily with who are you and how did Zero Carbon Harrogate come to pass? Tell us the story.
Some years back, 2015, the Paris climate change talks were taking place in December, and Ian, who's with me now, working with Christian Aid, put on a film showing of Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything, which refers to climate change. And from that film showing, we realised that we needed to take action locally, because it was great having the Paris climate change agreement at an international level, but what it really meant was that every community across the globe needed to transition to a low carbon economy, and we needed to do that as quickly as possible for the benefit of every community, and that's where Zero Carbon Harrogate was born.
Thank you. And what was the next stage? And after this film that Ian shared at a church, there were some people there. I understood that you chaired the panel or the questions which flowed from that. But when was your sort of moment of inauguration, the first sort of meeting?
So a few months afterwards, we got together with people who were interested in this, and we gradually developed some different working groups and took on the name Zero Carbon Harrogate because we knew that we needed to get to net zero.
It's a great name. And
following the work of Zero Carbon Britain, which has modelled different options of how we could get to zero, and some of us went on a training course with Zero Carbon Britain to upskill to make sure that we were on track with the kind of strategies that are needed to affect this locally. And we have, as I say, developed different working groups to look at the food side of things, carbon capture, which Ian heads up, buildings, transport, and how we engage with people locally.
Got it. And how many people are involved at the moment? How many people in your newsletter? How many people come to meetings? How frequent are the meetings?
So we have a couple of 100 people on our newsletter, and maybe about 30 people who are actively involved with our different working groups. We'd love to have more. Anybody is welcome to come and join us.
And when do you meet?
And so we have a series of public meetings every month or two. We'll put on events which we hope are of interest to the general public, and then we have committee meetings as and when the working groups need to progress work.
And what type of people are involved in these committees? Are you all sort of nerdy climate scientist types, or is it just kind of a mix of people from the area?
We're a very broad range of different people with different interests, and we are all concerned about making Harrogate District a better place to live. And that's what brings us together and drives us forward.
Could you talk about some of the live, present, local issues? I'm thinking of sort of the Nid Gorge issue. Is there going to be a road between wherever it is and wherever it is in Bilton? And is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? If maybe there's fewer cars parked, crawling on Wetherby Road, pumping out carbon dioxide and other awful gases outside my children's school, and in fact the cars move more quickly. Talk to us about the key issues at the moment in Harrogate.
Transport is a major issue. Nearly half of our carbon emissions in the district, according to the government statistics, come from transport, and it's an issue that's been neglected for many years, so that's why we have quite major traffic issues. We're coming quite late to the party compared to other towns and cities who've been much more proactive on this issue sooner. And we got involved when North Yorkshire County Council started to talk about what started being called a relief road review, and then was changed to a traffic congestion review because we pushed the fact that actually it needed to be broader than just one option on the table.
So that's a win for you. Zero carbon Harrogate, you made that change.
Yep.
Well done.
And we have been putting forward a wide range of different ideas in terms of sustainable transport options, because going forward, we need to reduce the number of cars on the roads. Electric vehicles take us some way to reducing our carbon emissions, because the electricity to drive cars can come from renewably generated electricity. But about half the carbon footprint of a car comes from its manufacture in the first place.
Thank you, I did not know that.
The other half comes from the fuel that you're using to drive it. So we can make a big change by moving to electric vehicles, but actually in the long term we need to have less vehicles on the road. So that means some of particularly our shorter journeys need to switch to other modes of transport. And in Harrogate and Knaresborough, almost half of the journeys are 1.6 miles on average. So about half of the traffic congestion is caused by short trips across town. And so there's a real opportunity to move to more active transport, so walking, cycling, children scooting to school. And the advantages of that would be much healthier lifestyles for us. Don't have to pay to go to the gym because you're walking instead, and much more sociable. It would improve safety on streets because there'd be many more people about. There'd be all sorts of additional benefits for us. Much greater independence for young people, being able to go to school independently rather than having to be driven by their parents.
Sounds wonderful. To the relief road specifically though, surely there's an argument that having fewer cars crawling along Wetherby Road both ways most of the time of the day is dreadful for everybody who lives around there. And I declare an interest because I live around there. Therefore, having a relief road, would it not free up Wetherby Road? And isn't it not better to have cars moving at, say, 15 miles an hour than crawling at 5 or 0 miles an hour? You know, what's the position of Zero Carbon Harrogate when it comes to the relief road on the Nid Gorge route?
I agree that the traffic congestion and the pollution from the traffic congestion along Wetherby Road and Skipton Road are miserable. But traffic is a bit like water. It flows along paths of least resistance. So as soon as you build new roads, you get more traffic, because all of us think, oh, we can get there more quickly, we can do that journey more easily. A great example is Bond End in Knaresborough, which is absolutely brilliant that the new roundabouts are improving the traffic flow there and reducing pollution levels from stationary traffic. However, locals have noticed and mentioned to me that actually it means that you get an increase in traffic flow because our sat-navs tell us we can now go through them more easily. So when you free up more road space, we'll get more cars on the road. So we have to actually think constructively about how we reduce the choices for cars and improve the choices for other modes of transport.
Very diplomatic, very eloquent. But the position of Zero Carbon Harrogate on the relief road is to oppose it because of, as you say, it's like water, the path of least resistance. Is that right? Is that my understanding of your position?
We totally oppose the relief road because that's in package E on North Yorkshire's consultation, and package B, which is the sustainable transport measures only, has an 800 times greater carbon reduction saving than the relief road in package E. So a relief road would be taking us completely in the wrong direction.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on whether it will be built or not? Do you have a particular feeling, or is it too early to say?
I'm really hoping that once we've got this consultation process, which is closing in a few days, out the way, then actually North Yorkshire, given the amazing response of over 10,000 local people responding, will stand back and realise that we need a strategic sustainable transport plan for the whole district, for the Harrogate district, and possibly more widely, because transport is such an important issue in terms of carbon emissions. Harrogate Borough Council have been very proactive and declared a motion in support of a climate emergency. That's been a fantastic step, the fact that they passed that motion in April, and therefore one of the important ways forward would actually be to start working with North Yorkshire County Council on a strategic transport plan.
I'm going to ask you a question which I think you might want to sidestep, but I'm going to ask it nevertheless. You've rightly praised Harrogate Borough Council for taking action in April. Great. But as we all know, it's North Yorkshire County Council that has the big budget, that's in charge of the schools and the roads and so forth. Why do you think it is that Harrogate Borough Council is perhaps leading the more senior partner of the two, and maybe leading them kicking and screaming, North Yorkshire County Council that is? Is there a tension there? Why is it being slow? What would you say if you would dare to answer the question?
I think probably North Yorkshire haven't previously grasped the critical situation that we're in with climate change. They haven't yet seen the vision for a low carbon future and actually got to grips with the fact that there are real benefits in terms of green jobs, cleaner air, better health. And I think now that those issues are becoming more aware nationally, and that the government has committed to be net carbon zero by 2050, I'm really hopeful that the North Yorkshire County Councillors will be more supportive and actually look at their putting in place a climate strategy for the County Council.
Great answer. Very skillfully done. Let me ask you about the No Idling campaign, which I think has been a massive success. Very exciting. Tell us all about it.
The No Idling campaign is headed up by Vicky Wild, one of our members of our transport group, and it's something that she was passionate about because she lives near Harrogate High School and St Robert's School, and she saw parents idling outside her house while they were waiting to pick up their children, and was just frustrated and sad about the fact that the air quality was poor outside these schools, and air pollution affects children to much greater extent than it does adults, because their lungs are still developing. So it was something that we really wanted to do something about, particularly as the carbon emissions from stationary vehicles is just a wasted environmental issue.
It makes me mad, Jemima. I get so furious when I see it. I almost want to tap on the windscreen and go, can you turn the engine off? There's no reason why you should have it running. Especially in the summer, there's no reason of the heat. There's no heat coming out. There's no need for it. You're saying it skillfully. I agree with you, and you've had success. It seems to be something that's really taken off, the No Idling campaign. It seems to be around nearly a lot of the schools. But I'm asking you, do the taxi drivers of Harrogate know it? Because when I see them parked near the station, it seems to me that they've frequently got their engines running. I know it's a difficult thing with the taxi drivers, but have you had any successes with the taxi drivers?
Well, we've been focused more on the schools to start with, and on Clean Air Day we were at Starbeck Crossing, Clean Air Day 20th of June, and had a great deal of success with drivers switching their engines off while they were waiting for the crossing. And our next stage of our campaign, actually, Andrew, is to go and have some conversations with the taxi drivers at the train station as well, with trains idling, and with the bus companies in terms of buses idling. Obviously not the wonderful new electric buses which Transdev have brought in, but with the other bus company.
They are wonderful, those new buses. Every time I see one of those electric buses, in fact one of them parks outside office or stops outside our office, it puts a big smile on my face. It does seem that we are making some progress. Now Jemima, Zero Carbon Harrogate has a fantastic website, it really does. Quite uplifting actually. It's not the world is coming to an end anytime soon sort of thing. It's this is what you can do and this is what we are doing. On your website, do you have a section about postcards from the future? Could you tell my listeners all about that element of your campaign?
So our postcards from the future are looking ahead to 2035 and thinking about how the Harrogate district might look then. Because it's quite hard for us to imagine how the future could be different. And if you just think back 10 years ago, most of us lived pretty much without the internet, and we couldn't have imagined 2019 where we are all so dependent upon the internet and how it benefits our lives, broadly speaking. So it's quite hard to imagine what a low carbon economy might look like. And so we have written some postcards from the future looking at how we could have healthier diets, we could have more local food, how we could have more active transport with cleaner air, how green jobs could be generated, how we could have a much greater amount of land for woodland and for recreation, all sorts of really exciting things that come with moving to a low carbon economy.
It's a great idea. Well done with it, very much so. Now, so my final question to you, Jemima, and perhaps that should be my first question, but I'd like to go in with a hard one to start off with and maybe finish with an easy one. Is, tell us about you. Who is Jemima Parker? What's your background? How did you get into this campaign, which clearly is something that you're devoting a great deal of time to and you're being very successful with?
So I've been a Harrogate resident for 18 years. As you can probably tell, I grew up down south, and I have come to really love and appreciate Harrogate and the Harrogate district and living in Yorkshire. And I started my career as a geography teacher, so I do love all things to do with people and place. And more latterly, I now work for the Church of England Diocese of Leeds as their environment officer. So my part-time job is encouraging and helping churches to take environmental issues, caring for creation seriously. And that's quite challenging with historic buildings, but it's very exciting in other ways.
Thank you, Jemima. You are relieved from the hot seat, but Ian Fraser, you are now in the hot seat. Welcome, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. Thank you for sitting patiently whilst Jemima answers those first questions. Now, we've just worked out, or just heard, who Jemima Parker is. Who is Ian Fraser? What's your story?
I was born in Canada. I've lived in the United Kingdom since 1987. I came here to study furniture making, furniture design, and latterly furniture conservation. And I worked for a little while in the antiques trade, restoring antiques, before a post came up at Leeds Museums and Galleries to work with the conservation staff for the local authority museum service at Leeds City Council.
And how long have you worked there?
30 years now. So it's been an opportunity to raise a family and have a stable life.
And do you live around Harrogate Way?
I live in Harrogate. I'm also now a UK citizen as well.
Congratulations, I think. Did you have to pass that test?
No, there was no test.
No
we did it back in 2000, so there's no test.
Ian, you say that you are an expert, very experienced in the matters of sort of furniture, I guess antiques and so on.
Yeah, woodworking.
Woodworking.
Yeah, cabinet
furniture,
making.
cabinet making. Sorry, I used the wrong terminology, cabinet making. So, of course, which is made...
And furniture conservation, looking after it, yeah.
Indeed. Of course, all made of wood, which is carbon. When you see these beautiful pieces, those sort of Chippendale pieces, do you just see hunks of carbon collected in something beautiful and functional? Or do you... How does Ian Fraser, with your background, see items made of wood?
Well, I see them first and foremost as something that a skilled person has taken a material and made something either useful or beautiful, or sometimes both. And it's come from the past, it's here now, and it's had a life and a history. And if I'm to repair it, then I try and think about the processes that were behind making it, as well as the material.
Ian, as someone who has a great deal of experience and expertise in cabinets of some repute.
Yeah, cabinet making, furniture making, yeah.
And the very famous cabinet maker Chippendale, I think, was from Otley, not too far away.
Correct.
And a lot of his stuff populates Harewood House and other wealthy houses around these parts. Is there not an element of you as an environmentalist who sees a cabinet as a chopped down tree, an old gorgeous tree chopped down, no longer soaking up carbon, and probably shouldn't have been cut down?
Well, not really, because timber is a renewable resource, okay? That's the first thing to bear in mind. And if woodlands are managed sustainably, then you can use timber. It's a material that humans have used for millennia, for all kinds of purposes. We use it as a fuel, we used it for shelters, for transport, for weapons, for medicine. I mean, it's just a material that we've used throughout history. It's one of the first materials that we actually learned to use and work. So it's had all kinds of uses. And the trouble, of course, with the fossilized stuff, that's very energy dense, but it's also what we've been burning and fueling things like the Industrial Revolution in the modern world, and pumping out lots of global warming gases. And yet it's causing heat retention, so the earth is warming up. So although, carbon, this marvelous material that's unique and can form all kinds of bonds with different kinds of other things that create life, that's the basis of life, if we burn it and it put up into the atmosphere, we're heating up the earth. And yet on the other hand, trees, as they grow, will soak up carbon. They will capture it. And they will give us many other benefits too. As I said, it's a renewable resource, but if you walk through woodlands, do you feel good when you walk through woodlands? Do you like it?
I do.
Yes, well, you see, that's hardwired into our psyche, and going back, back to our primate ancestors. It's kind of a genetic memory, if you like. That oak tree that you walk by in the forest, that's actually a long-lost cousin of yours.
That's a nice way of looking at it.
Down the tree of life, you've actually shared a common ancestor with the trees. So we are part of nature as well. But they give many other benefits besides, you're feeling good, you're feeling better, that well-being aspect. Woodlands, as I said, they will soak up carbon, and we have to actually draw carbon out of the atmosphere as part of the tackling of climate change. Climate breakdown is the term I prefer to use, because of climate change is a little bit anodyne. I mean, it's like saying an invading army is uninvited guests, when actually it's a crisis that we're in. But it also provides other benefits too. For instance, remember the Boxing Day floods 2015 in Yorkshire? Well, we're getting more and more extreme weather events. We're getting more water in shorter periods of time, as well as the wind events and things like that. So that led to flooding, a lot of flooding, terrible flooding in Leeds and other parts of Yorkshire. Trees will help make the soil more permeable. They will slow the flow. Okay, that's another benefit that they will do. They help restore our landscape by having them. They'll improve air quality, soil quality, water quality. They have many other benefits, as well as capturing carbon.
And should we therefore...
And biodiversity. Let's not forget about biodiversity's habitats, because actually this nation, we love the countryside, or people, they do love the countryside. And you would have thought, okay, we have an incredibly well looked after environment. Actually, we're in one of the most nature depleted nations in the world.
And how is Yorkshire doing within that nature depleted nation?
Well, if we look at statistics like woodland cover in Europe, it's about 36%, the average. In Britain, the national average is about 12%. In our part of the world here, in North Yorkshire, it's down to about 8%. I know Harrogate looks quite wooded, but there's other parts that are very denuded.
So let me just be clear about that point. 8% of the landmass of Yorkshire has woodland, only 8%.
In North Yorkshire.
North Yorkshire, thank you. And that's in compared to 36% you said in Europe.
European average.
That seems much higher than I would have imagined it to be, but 8% probably seems about right. And until our conversation, I didn't think that was weird. You're saying actually, hang on a second, people of North Yorkshire, 8% is absurdly low. We need to do something radical about it. So what's your plan? What's Zero Carbon Harrogate's plan for reforesting?
Okay, just a little bit about one of the reasons, various reasons why there's much less woodland than there was historically. Agricultural practices, partly, industrial revolution, building an empire, all that kind of stuff. It's all historic reasons for it. Essentially, we need to have much higher woodland cover. And this is recognized by our government, okay? There are strategies for increasing woodland cover. About 18 months ago, there's a plan for the Northern Forest was launched, and this is a plan to link up the community forests, forest of the Mersey Forest, City of Trees in Manchester, White Rose Forest, which is where we are, but it's also the biggest geographical footprint of the Northern Forest, and the Hull and East Yorkshire woods. So these are an existing community forests, but the Northern Forest project will grow them. So they'll be bigger and they'll link up, and also weaving it into the urban landscapes, because the Green Streets principles is one of the things that will be one of the key themes running through the Northern Forest project. Because we have landscapes for water, we're going to have them in rural landscapes, sure, but we also need to integrate it into the built environment as well, for health reasons and all kind of air quality, and also to help reconnect people with nature and the natural environment, but also to make those all essential corridors for biodiversity, which is, going back to that point about being a very nature depleted country. I mean, this book, Our Place, was a real opener. It was written by Mark Cocker, a highly recommended book. And I would just like to read one quote, if I may.
You will be the first person I've interviewed who's read a quote out, but by all means, Ian.
Now, Mark Cocker knows so much about the natural wildlife of the British Isles. He wrote this after the State of Nature report came out in 2016, and that was about 50 kind of wildlife organizations got together for the State of Nature report. And I just want to read to you a quote from the book. And here we go. Nature is slipping away from these islands, slowly, steadily, inexorably, field by field, dike by dike. I know it. We now know it. There can be no dispute. Not since the last ice age has Britain been so stripped bare of its natural inhabitants.
That's a moving piece. Thank you for sharing it.
And it's a very, very, it's kind of a disturbing book in some ways, but it's also a very hopeful book. There's ways out.
I think we all know, wherever we live in the country, that houses on roads which have trees are more desirable than ones without it. I get that, and good luck to Zero Carbon Harrogate and others who are trying to plant trees in urban areas. But out in the sticks, where there's farms, and maybe sheep, and so on, the reason why there are no trees there is because the land is being used clearly for other commercial purposes. What's the plan for this Northern Forest? How are they going to plant trees on somebody else's land? How do you get the farmers' approval, landowners' approval? Do you have to buy it off them? Do you know the details? Because I've heard about the Northern Powerhouse, and everyone's talking about it, and George Osborne's in it, and it's all over the news with Boris Johnson saying this and that at the moment. Northern Forest, I don't really hear anybody talking about it. You're one of the few people I've heard ever mention it.
Well, it's something I hope in coming months that more and more people will hear about it. Certainly Zero Carbon Harrogate will be doing more about promoting the Northern Forest. It's a project that the government is taking forward with the Community Forests and the Woodland Trust As far as getting more trees in the ground, yes, it's going to be about landowner engagement and giving them incentives to change the use of their land, and as I said, giving them incentives to actually do that. These things are necessary to do as a nation. We have to do that to reach our net zero target, and it becomes incumbent, therefore, on the government to develop policies and incentives for landowners to actually cooperate and allow the tree planting to take place. Getting money for trees is not the problem. It's getting access to land. That's the problem. And so it's going to be about landowner engagement and also incentives for them. And it's early days yet. Okay, this is stuff that they're actively working on now. Every community forest has got working groups. Okay, for instance, within the Leeds City region, which is pretty much coincident with the area of the White Rose Forest, there's quite a lot of local authorities. Harrogate District, where we live, I'm on the working group that will be delivering our contribution to the White Rose Forest, and it's chaired by Harrogate Borough Council's arboriculture manager, Paul Casey. But there's representatives from the Woodland Trust on it, from the Forestry Commission, from the United Bank of Carbon, myself and Zero Carbon Harrogate. So there's a wide and the Nitterdale AONB as well. So there's a wide representation of people. But Paul will be largely responsible for devising the plan, but we actually are going to be people who are helping him with the landowner engagement.
And how can local people of Harrogate get involved? Because pretty much everybody wants to plant a tree. And before you answer that question, I remember seeing a news story on some very obscure news site. I don't know how it came to be in my newsfeed. Perhaps it was a Facebook thing. I think it was a few months ago in India, in one of the states. They planted something like 20 million trees in a weekend. Every male, female, whatever it was in one state was given some trees to plant in a particular area, and that blew my mind that they could do that. What can people here do?
What can people do locally about increasing woodland cover? Well, if they own land, plant some trees in it if they can. Look after the ones they have. They can support organizations like the Wildlife Trusts and the Woodland Trust. They could, or our local Rotary of Harrogate Carbon Balance Scheme, which is advertised through our Zero Carbon Harrogate website. You can make regular donations to these organizations, and they do engage with landowners to get more trees in the ground.
Anything in terms of politics? Who should people be voting for around here? Is there a party which...
Well, you should definitely be telling politicians what you want them to do in terms of our landscape and how it's looked after. If we want to see more trees in the region, and believe me, it'll do a great deal of good increasing, the quality of life, increasing the woodland cover, then tell your politicians that's what you want. You want to see this Northern Forest project to be a big success. 25-year project, 50 million trees over 25 years. And we want to see it, this wonderful forest, and we can help to create it. But you need to tell the politicians that.
I love your passion, Ian, I very much do. Now, I have a question which is specific to my garden, but I imagine lots of other people have this question too. So in our garden we have some trees which are always flowering. What are they called? Deciduous? Help me out here.
Conifers are the ones that don't lose their needles or leaves.
Sure.
Deciduous shed their leaves.
Thank you for explaining the difference and showcasing my silliness and naivety when it comes to matters of trees. I'm doing my best. But in my garden we have a variety of trees, and my wife says to me, Andrew, we need to cut down tree X because it is killing trees B, C, D and Y or whatever. And I think, oh no, we can't cut a tree down because we're cutting a tree down. And she says, well, they all kill the other trees. I know that's a very specific question, to more of a tree surgeon type question, but do you have any sort of pearls of wisdom for people who have that quandary? And I also ask, bearing in mind that I can see trees around Harrogate that have got stickers on them which say, call the council, we can't cut this tree down. People are campaigning on these points. So maybe it's Zero Carbon Harrogate that are doing those things. Just give us some takeaways, please.
Well, I think if a tree is actually giving you a problem on your property, I mean, if it's undermining your building, then you should do something about it.
Okay.
You know, or if it's affecting other trees. But I'm not a tree surgeon, so it's hard to advise on. You know, you have to look at sort of kind of the bigger picture. If you remove a tree, say in your garden for whatever reason, and it upsets you, then plant 10 more somewhere else.
Fair enough. And which tree should we plant? You know, which other ones which grow faster, soak up more carbon than others?
I mean, there are. Which kind of trees to plant? Well, you need to be pragmatic about it. I mean, there are purists that say that they should only be sort of European or British hardwoods as we build the northern forest. I think most people managing, forests and arboriculture managers are more pragmatic about that. They know the climate is changing, first of all, and some of the species that were here historically are possibly going to do less well than other ones from other parts of the world. And if we're talking about carbon capture and slowing the flow and things like that, then perhaps we need to think about more widely about other kinds of species. But often case it will be European hardwoods that we use. Oak is a good example.
Thank you, Ian.
Sycamores do a lot of good too.
I'm sure. Now on the news today, there was a piece about meadows and how we've lost something like 96% of our meadows. And in those meadows, there are buttercups and all sorts of other things which are useful for insects. And my question therefore is to you, if we are just planting trees in forests and they say the trees are, for the sake of argument, 2 meters apart from each other and it looks like a properly artificial forest, if that's the right term, how will the need for biodiversity, which is really important, interplay with the need for carbon reduction? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, should we let things just grow wild, or should we be managing them and just planting as many trees to capture the carbon? It seems like there is a tension between those two drivers.
No, I don't think there is a tension. First of all, you have to get the idea, what is a forest? You might think that it's, hundreds or thousands of acres of vast woodlands. That can be, but also forests can be smaller. It's about woodlands and creating habitats and corridors between them. So there can be different kinds of environments for different kinds of species, flora and fauna. Some things don't necessarily thrive that well in woodlands, but the meadows can come back as well, and the hedgerows. So it's about creating corridors between the woodlands. But one of the reasons why we're so depleted, nature is so depleted, is because we lost habitats, and woodlands are a really important habitat for all kinds of biodiversity on which we rely for ecosystem services which sustain life. If we lose ecosystem services or they're depleted, they become less resilient. We suffer because they produce their primary production of food for the base of the food chain. Okay, they also provide, there's all kinds of things that they provide for us, ecosystem services, the soil that we grow things in. They also clean the water. There's cultural aspects of it too, for ecosystem services. And what underpins those ecosystem services is biodiversity. Biodiversity goes down, and we've seen insect populations have been plummeting. Ecosystem services are depleted, and that damages us.
Thank you, Ian. Ian, I'm glad you mentioned insects. I was out at a networking event, surprise, surprise, not too long ago with some people that had driven over from Ireland, and they were saying to me in a rather macabre way that they looked at their car at the end of this journey that they'd been on, and they hadn't killed any flies on their car, and they'd really noticed an absolute absence of flies when they expected to see dead flies everywhere. And I agree, I just don't see them anymore. When I open our windows, we're not getting annoying flies in our houses anymore, in our offices. I rarely see it. In fact, I can't remember really seeing a wasp this year, and we're sort of start of July 2019. I'm finding it utterly bonkers and quite scary. Jemima mentioned the really hot weather in February. I remember sitting in the Everyman in Harrogate in the outdoor bit in February, just wearing a shirt in the sun, and I reckon I got a suntan that day in February. And it reminded me of a news article I also heard around that time of year that spring 2019 started in winter 2018. It seems to me that the seasons are confused at the moment, and I'm surprised that more people, particularly in this area, in this affluent and well-educated area, aren't talking about it enough and aren't putting enough pressure on their politicians. Speaking of politicians, what should people do? Who should they vote for? How do they apply pressure on the people who represent them around here?
Well, I think it is very important that people are politically active. They must exercise their franchise and vote. But what I would say, and it's advice that comes in this excellent book, There's No Planet B by Mike Berners-Lee, is that you interrogate the policies and plans that the political parties are putting forward. If you care about the planet and the environment, what are their green strategies for healing the biosphere, or rather helping the biosphere to heal itself? What is their strategy for transitioning off of fossil fuels and creating what they, green collar jobs, effectively?
I've never heard that term, green collar jobs.
Well, white collar, blue collar.
Yeah, I get it.
Things that are to do, well, how do you describe it? Things that for instance, anything that will help transition off of fossil fuels. There's going to be a lot of technical things that we need, whether it's in the building industry or whether it's in transport, all these things. It's going to fundamentally change the technologies that we have and the energy usage, and therefore it follows that people are going to have to reskill for different kinds of engineering and manufacturing. Those are what loosely you could call green collar jobs. What are they doing? What are their policies and plans and the timetable? And interrogate those really closely, look at them closely, and vote accordingly. That's what I would say. That's what I've done.
A great message. Now, here in Harrogate, we have, near the Army Foundation base on Pennypot Lane, around there, we have the 3 or 4, I think it's 3, mega wind turbines. And they're not always turning. I know a lot of people around here particularly live in that area, or there aren't that many people live in that area. It seems to me are up in arms that they have 3 wind turbines. They're not so bothered about an army base with golf balls, but they are bothered about wind turbines which might hit a very slow flying blind bird, or birds, flocks. Do you have any particular message to people who, campaign and bother their politicians and say, not in my backyard are we having any wind turbines on, in our view, spoiling our view of the countryside. We moved here, we paid a lot for our house, we don't want to see any wind turbines.
Yeah, it is a part of the energy mix that that's coming into the national grid. What I would say is that there's far more being built out at sea than is coming on land. They've got these vast arrays being built out off the east coast of Yorkshire. So we're actually I think Britain is the world leader in generating electricity from turbines.
Thanks.
There are some on land, yes, and I agree they can be a little bit unsightly, but it's a necessary step. We'd have to do it, but most of them are actually being built not on land.
Thank you, Ian. Now, can I turn to Jemima to answer the question as well? Because I know you have got your hand up and saying, Andrew, asking me about wind turbines on land. I think I've got something to say.
Well, as we move to renewable energy, we're going to need more and more wind and solar and hydro. And at the moment, most of the energy that we use in the district is imported from outside the district. So actually, economically, we're doing ourselves a disservice because our energy isn't generated locally. It would be cheaper if we were generating more locally. And so the more solar panels, solar farms and hydro projects and so forth that we can put locally, the more cheaper local energy we can enjoy.
That's an argument you don't normally hear. It's a very sound, coherent argument, but not one that we hear. I think people of Harrogate think, in North Yorkshire we don't have power stations, they're all in South Yorkshire, down near the M1. We don't want any of that sort of coal, sort of smoke blowing our direction.
But if it's clean energy, why not have it locally? Because it generates jobs locally, and it's cheaper because you don't have so much losses in transmission. And at the moment, about a third of our electricity is lost in transmission. So if it's generated more locally, we would lose less. It's very inefficient.
Explain that to me. That's another one I've not heard, and I think I'm reasonably well informed. You said a third of energy is lost in its transmission. Could you explain that? Are there cables, letting electricity, evaporate, for want of a better expression, from the cables? How do you mean?
So,
what do you mean by that?
Electricity travelling over long distances loses energy through heat, and so it should be generated locally in order to reduce that.
It sounds so obvious when you put it like that. In fact, many things that you say seem obvious, and I've not heard before. It seems that you guys, your biggest issue to overcome is ignorance, and I have displayed my total ignorance, and I'm quite into this, and I don't know. And I'm grateful to you both for educating this dunderhead over here. And this dunderhead runs a business, and I will plug my business for pretty much the first time on the Harrogate podcast to say that we are looking at buying some woodland ourselves to let our clients have access to it and our staff to have access to it, and to reforest it and to take photographs of it and have drones up and down it recording its development over the years. And we can't wait to get that going. It's a little bit complicated, but we're hoping to do that, and if it's successful, we'll buy more woodland. And as a business owner, it takes me to the obvious question. There are lots of small businesses in Harrogate and big businesses as well. What can we be doing outside of the political remit and bothering our politicians? What can we be doing in our buildings, for example, and anything else, Jemima?
So for businesses, one of the quickest things that both businesses and individuals can do is to switch their electricity supplier to a 100% renewable tariff, and in that way you're supporting companies who are producing renewable electricity, and your money isn't then going into fossil fuel being burnt to generate electricity. So quick job, looking at different suppliers, and to just move to a 100% renewable tariff.
Off the top of your head, do you know roughly the difference in price, percentage-wise? Any ideas?
There's often not a great deal of difference in price. If you work with a broker, they may well be able to get you a really good deal.
Okay. What else can businesses do?
Improving conditions for your staff and helping your staff with their transport. So installing electric charge points, so to encourage your staff to you have an electric car, means they can charge it at work and get home again. And then providing facilities such as bike parking or shower facilities so that they can travel to work in an active way. And then taking on a carbon literacy exercise to get there's something called the Carbon Literacy Project, which gives you like a kite mark for being a carbon literate company. So that might be something that as a business you could take on. You could be the first business in Harrogate to become carbon literate accredited.
Are you saying that there are no businesses in Harrogate that are?
Not to my knowledge.
That's pretty astounding. Now, what are the other areas in the country like? Do you happen to know? So is it a southerner?
No, Manchester is the leader in this, and Manchester is looking to become a leader. Lots of different businesses in Manchester have taken on the Carbon Literacy Project.
As a Mancunian, I am quite happy to hear that. Thank you for that. Jemima, as a penultimate question, what should the people of Harrogate be doing to reduce their carbon footprint?
Just some simple steps that people could take. Again, like businesses, switching to 100% renewable electricity tariff is a really easy thing to do. Next time your contract's up for renewal. Taking one journey in the week and seeing if you can switch to either walking or using public transport for that journey. May take just a little bit of planning to think about how you do that, but start just with one journey a week. Possibly not at this time of year, but I was going to say turn your heating down by 1 degree. So when we come to some cooler weather in the winter, just turning your heating down by 1 degree, dig out those nice warm fluffy jumpers and put those on instead. That makes a significant difference to your carbon emissions, reducing the amount of gas you have to burn for your heating. And lastly, the more challenging one is to think about where you're taking your holidays, or if you have to travel for work, thinking about your flights and thinking how you can have great creative holidays, either taking the train or the ferry to Europe, or if you can get away with doing business over Skype, or rather than having to do all face-to-face meetings.
Great answers. That was 4 things, not 3, but I think
cheated.
I'll allow you the 4. In respect to plane travel, I imagine most people understand that planes kick out more carbon than any other form of transport. But surely if the wealthy people of Harrogate, or the middle class people of Harrogate, however you wanted to define them, are going on their long haul flights this summer, could they just not offset their carbon by planting trees with Ian and his team?
They certainly could, and that would be a good thing to do if you are taking a flight, but it's really better not to put the carbon into the atmosphere in the first place.
Very succinct. Ian and Jemima, thank you very much. You've educated me, if nothing else. I hope that this podcast helps you to get your message out there. As I said, I do think I'm reasonably well informed and interested in this area, and yet you have blown my mind with statistics, and you haven't used many that I simply didn't know, and I imagine many people don't know as well. And so thank you for taking quite a long period of time to sort of bond with me, reach out to me, connect with me by email, and to be here today. We've sort of been here for almost 3 hours, and so thank you for your time. And thank you for our listeners for listening. Now finally though, Jemima, this is very finally, how do people get in touch with you and the campaign?
So you'll find our contact details on the website, Zero Carbon Harrogate, if you want to do a search for it. And you can get in touch with us through Facebook, our Facebook page, or through Twitter.
Thank you very much. Best of wishes to you both. Thank you.